My mother slammed the door on Christmas night, leaving me standing in the freezing snow with a torn suitcase. I heard the deadbolt slide shut like a gunshot. She thought she was kicking out a burden. So I pulled out my phone and canceled every bill I had paid for 3 years. 2 hours later, my bank called with a question that changed everything. "Ma'am, do you know you are the sole owner of that house? My name is Marissa Reed. I am 34 years old, and I stood in the sterile beige hallway of the Cedar County Courthouse in Riverton, North Carolina, listening to the destruction of my family through a heavy oak door. The fluorescent lights above me hummed with a headache-inducing frequency that seemed to vibrate right through the soles of my heels. The air smelled of floor wax and stale coffee. It was the scent of bureaucracy and bad news. I leaned my head back against the cold plaster wall and closed my eyes. Inside courtroom B, people were arguing about the ownership of a house that I had been thrown out of exactly 3 weeks ago. My lawyer, Lena Hart, was currently speaking. I could not see her, but I could picture her perfectly. She would be standing straight, her posture rigid, tapping a manicured finger on the defense table. Her voice cut through the thick wood of the door, muffled but distinct. She was not shouting. She did not need to shout. She was dousing the room in cold, hard facts. She was telling the court that the mortgage documents for the property on Elm Street listed the borrower and the payer as Marissa Reed, not Gordon Reed, not Elaine Reed. Me. My stomach twisted as I heard my father's voice rumble in response. Gordon was using his favorite tone. It was a deep, gravelly baritone that he reserved for church deacons and bank tellers he wanted to intimidate. "Your Honor, it's a misunderstanding," I heard him say, his voice booming enough to penetrate the wall. "Our daughter, she's been unstable. We were just trying to protect the family assets. She ran away after a mental break on Christmas. We are just holding the fort." I opened my eyes and looked down at my left wrist. A pale, jagged scar ran across the sensitive skin there. It was the souvenir from a car accident on an icy highway 6 months ago. I rubbed the raised tissue with my thumb. It throbbed in the cold air of the courthouse. That accident was the gap. It was the blind spot. For 3 weeks, I was in a hospital bed, medicated and foggy, drifting in and out of consciousness. That was when the paperwork must have shuffled across my tray table. That was when they must have guided my hand or forged my signature while I was too weak to read the fine print. The heavy door to the courtroom cracked open as a bailiff slipped out to check a schedule. Through the sliver of space, I saw the witness stand. My breath hitched in my throat. Miles Carver was sitting there. He was wearing the navy suit I had bought him for his birthday last year. Miles, my ex-boyfriend, the man who had promised to help me organize my chaotic finances after the accident. He was staring intensely at his hands, which were clasped tightly in his lap. He looked terrified. He refused to look toward the gallery or the door. He knew I was out here. My phone buzzed against my palm, startling me. I looked down to see a text message from Lena. "Don't come in yet. Let them talk. They bury themselves. The more they speak." I gripped the phone tighter. I could feel the anger rising in my chest, hot and suffocating, contrasting sharply with the freezing hallway. I flashed back to that night. Christmas. The smell of cinnamon candles and the warmth of the fireplace that I paid for. I remembered the look on my mother's face. It wasn't disappointment. It was pure, unadulterated malice. "Get out of my house. Right now." That single sentence had severed the tether. If she had shown even an ounce of mercy, I might have kept paying their bills until I went bankrupt. I might have let them bleed me dry. But she had to own the moment. She had to be the queen of a castle she did not own. Inside the courtroom, the judge's voice interrupted my memory. He sounded bored but impatient. "Mr. Reed, I am looking at the file. I need the original copy of the management transfer deed and the residency confirmation affidavit. The bank has flagged the digital copies as potentially irregular." I frowned. Management transfer deed. Residency confirmation. I had never heard those terms in my life. I had certainly never signed a document with those titles. I stepped back, hiding myself behind a thick concrete pillar as the bailiff moved back toward the door. I wrapped my arms around myself. The pieces were clicking into place. If the bank was telling the truth, if I really owned that house, then my parents and Miles had constructed an elaborate cage of lies to keep me paying for a roof I wasn't allowed to sleep under. They thought they were clever. They thought I was just the obedient daughter who wrote checks and stayed quiet. I stared at the closed door. The price of their deception was coming due, and I was going to be the one to collect it. 3 years ago, my life was a spreadsheet that actually balanced. I was the operations manager at Northbridge Utility Solutions, pulling in a salary that placed me firmly in the upper middle class. I lived by Outlook calendars, quarterly goals, and the comforting certainty of numbers. I had even bought a small townhouse on the edge of the city. It was just me and my quiet walls, a sanctuary away from the chaos I grew up in. But while my career was a straight line upward, my finances were leaking from the bottom, draining directly into a house I did not live in. Every month, I sat down with a glass of wine and a stack of bills that belonged to my parents. It started small with the electric bill and the water. Then it grew. The internet package they insisted was necessary for my father's news consumption, then the homeowner's insurance, and finally, the crushing weight of the property taxes. They called me in panics, usually late at night when I was trying to sleep before a big presentation. "We are going to lose the house. Marissa." My mother would cry into the phone. "The county sent another pink letter. We have nowhere else to go." So I paid. I set up auto pay. I became the silent pillar holding up their roof. Gordon, my father, never cried. He operated on a system of aggressive entitlement. He would sit in his recliner, the television blaring, while I wrote checks at their kitchen table. "We raised you. Marissa," he would say, not even looking at me. "We put clothes on your back when we had nothing. Now you pay back. It is only right." Elaine was softer, but her weapon was sharper. She used shame. She would touch my arm with cold fingers and whisper, "I just want our family to be respectable. I don't want the neighbors to talk. I don't want outsiders laughing at us because we can't keep our lights on." I told myself this was love. I told myself that transaction history was a modern language of care. I justified it every time I saw my savings stagnate. Just one more season, I would think. Just get them through the winter and they will be stable. Then Miles became a fixture in our lives. He worked in document services and carried himself with the air of a man who knew how the system worked. He saw my kitchen table covered in tax forms and insurance declarations and shook his head. "Let me handle the filing." "Riss," he said, taking a stack of papers from my tired hands. "Trust me, I can handle it. You work too hard already to worry about this bureaucratic mess." I let him. I was so tired of fighting the paperwork alone that I let him take the lead. He organized the contracts, he spoke to the insurance agents, and he filed the tax documents. He was my hero, or so I thought. However, the friction started whenever I asked to see the actual deed. I just wanted to verify the ownership details before paying another $5,000 in taxes. Gordon slammed his hand on the table, making the coffee cups rattle. "Why are you asking?" "Do you think your father is a liar? Don't you trust me?" I backed down. I always backed down. There was one detail that bothered me. A digital ghost in the machine. Whenever I logged into the county payment portal to pay the property tax, the receipt displayed my name in the field for owner of record. I pointed it out to my mother once. Elaine waved a hand dismissively. "That is just because you transferred the money from your account. Sweetie, the computer just reads the routing number and puts your name there. It doesn't mean anything." It sounded plausible enough to a daughter who desperately wanted to believe her parents were not conning her. I ignored my gut. I buried the suspicion under 60-hour work weeks at Northbridge. That was until a Tuesday afternoon. I was between meetings when my cell phone rang. "Ms. Reed, I am calling regarding your mortgage account," a woman's voice said. I frowned, stepping into an empty conference room. "I don't have a mortgage with you. I rent my townhouse." "I think you have the wrong number." There was a pause on the line. I heard the click of a keyboard. "Oh," the woman said. her tone shifting abruptly. My apologies. I must have the wrong file. She hung up before I could ask another question. I stared at the phone, a cold feeling spreading through my chest. That was the first crack in the glass, but I was too afraid to look through it. I didn't know then that the call wasn't a mistake. It was a premature leak of a reality that was about to crash down on me. The roast beef sat in the center of the table, cold and barely touched. It was Christmas night in Riverton, but the air inside my parents' dining room felt less like a holiday and more like a performance review where I was already failing. The tree in the corner blinked with manic cheerfulness, completely out of sync with the silence that hung over the four of us. I had driven 3 hours to be here, hoping for a ceasefire. Instead, I had walked into an ambush. My father wiped his mouth with a napkin, staring at me across the centerpiece. He didn't ask about my job. He didn't ask about my life. He just laid his heavy forearms on the table. "You have been distant, Marissa," Gordon said. His voice was flat. "You act like your money makes you better than this family. You live in that townhouse and you forget who made you." I put my fork down. "Dad, I pay every bill for this house." I was just... He cut me off by sliding a blue folder across the tablecloth. It stopped right next to my wine glass. "If you still consider yourself part of this family, you will sign this," he said. "It is just a power of attorney. It lets us handle the bills directly so we don't have to beg you every time a letter comes." I opened the folder. I expected a simple authorization form for the utility company. Instead, I saw dense legal paragraphs. My eyes scanned the bold text. Full power of attorney, unlimited signing authority, right to borrow, right to encumber real property. My blood ran cold. This wasn't about paying the electric bill. This was a blank check for my entire life. I can't sign this," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "Dad, this gives you the right to take out loans in my name. This gives you total control." I pushed the folder back. My mother, who had been quietly picking at her potatoes, looked up, her face hard. The soft, pleading mother from the phone calls was gone. "You don't trust us?" Elaine asked, her voice rising. "After everything we sacrificed? If you don't sign that..." "Marissa, I will not let you step foot in this house again." I looked at Miles. I expected him to jump in. I expected him to explain that this legal document was insane, that nobody signs this casually over Christmas dinner. But he didn't look surprised. He didn't look at me. He looked at the folder. "Riss, just sign it," Miles said, his voice smooth and rehearsed. "It's just a formality." You're making everything harder than it needs to be." "Just help them out." The betrayal hit me harder than the threat. They had discussed this. They had planned this. I looked around the table and realized the truth. They didn't miss me. They didn't want my company. They wanted my signature because it was the key to a safe they couldn't crack. "No," I said, standing up. "I am not signing." Gordon stood up too. He was fast for a man of his age. He snatched my phone off the table before I could grab it. "You ungrateful little brat," he spat. "You are only good for making money. You don't know how to be a daughter. You never did." He threw the phone onto the couch, keeping it just out of my reach, forcing me to step away from the table. That was the signal. Elaine stood up and walked to the front closet. She grabbed my coat and my bag. She didn't hand them to me. She opened the front door and threw them out onto the concrete porch. "Get out," Elaine screamed. "You don't belong to this house tonight. Go be with your money." I grabbed my phone and walked to the door. I didn't cry. The shock had frozen my tear ducts. I stepped out into the biting wind of the North Carolina winter. The snow was wet and gray against my boots. I turned around to say something, anything, to the woman who gave birth to me, but she was already closing the door. Click. I heard the deadbolt slide home. It was a heavy, decisive sound. I stood there shivering, looking at the closed door. A realization settled over me, colder than the wind. That click wasn't a reaction to an argument. It was too fast. It was too final. They hadn't kicked me out because they were angry. They kicked me out because the plan had failed. They tried to trap me, and when I refused, they discarded me. I picked up my bag. If they wanted me gone, I would be gone. But they had forgotten whose name was on the checks. I sat in a vinyl booth at a 24-hour diner 3 miles from my parents' subdivision, staring at the blue light of my phone screen. It was 2 a.m. The waitress had stopped refilling my coffee an hour ago. My thumb hovered over the banking app, illuminating a long list of pending transactions that were scheduled to hit my account on the 1st of the month. Riverton Water and Sewer, Duke Energy, State Farm Homeowners Insurance, Comcast Xfinity. They were all there, a digital parasite draining my income to keep a house warm that I had just been thrown out of. The anger from the front porch had cooled into a sharp, icy clarity. I did not just want to leave, I wanted to disappear from their ledger. I tapped the screen. Cancel auto pay. Confirm. I went to the next one. Unlink payment method. Confirm. I logged into the utility portals one by one. I removed my credit card information and replaced the billing address with the physical address of the house. If Gordon and Elaine wanted electricity, they could write a check like everyone else. I locked my secondary credit cards. I froze the authorized user accounts. By the time I finished, the screen said, "No pending transactions." It felt like cutting a heavy rope that had been dragging me underwater. I put my head down on the sticky table and closed my eyes, finally drifting into a restless sleep. I was woken up by the vibration of my phone against the Formica table. The sun was glaring through the blinds. It was 9 o'clock. The caller ID showed a toll-free number I did not recognize. I cleared my throat and answered. "Hello, Ms. Reed. This is the Fraud and Collections Department at Sovereign Bank," a crisp male voice said. "We received a notification that you revoked the automatic draft authorization for your mortgage this morning." I rubbed my temple. "I don't have a mortgage with you. I have a checking account." "If this is about the utilities, I canceled those because I don't live there anymore." There was a pause on the line. The typing sound of a mechanical keyboard clicked rapidly in the background. "Ms. Reed, I am looking at the loan regarding the property at 42 Elm Street," the agent said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming more serious. "You are the primary borrower. The loan is in your name. If you stop payment, we will initiate pre-foreclosure proceedings. Do you understand the consequences to your credit score?" I sat up straight, the blood draining from my face. "Excuse me. You have made a mistake. My father, Gordon Reed, owns that house. I just helped with bills." "No, ma'am," the agent replied firmly. "According to our records, you are the sole legal owner of the property. The deed was transferred and the mortgage was refinanced in your name 18 months ago. 18 months. The world seemed to tilt sideways. "Send me the proof," I whispered. "Send me the file right now." A moment later, a secure email notification popped up on my screen. I opened the PDF attachment with trembling fingers. There it was. A refinancing agreement for $300,000. The borrower was listed as Marissa Reed. The signature at the bottom was a scrawl that looked like mine, but slightly off, loops a little too wide. I looked at the date next to the signature, July 15th, 2 years ago. My breath caught in my throat. On July 15th, I was not sitting in a bank office. I was in a hospital bed at Cedar County General, recovering from a spinal fracture after my car spun off the highway during a freak summer storm. I was on heavy painkillers. I couldn't even hold a spoon, let alone a pen. Then I remembered Miles. I remembered him sitting by my bedside, a stack of papers in his lap. I remembered his soothing voice. "Riss. Don't worry about the mail," he had said. "I brought some insurance forms. Just scribbles. I'll guide your hand. We need to get this filed so the medical bills get paid." I felt sick. I had thought he was helping me file medical claims. I minimized the bank app and dialed my mother's number. She answered on the second ring, her voice tight. "I told you not to come back. Marissa?" "I don't want to come back," I said. my voice shaking with a mix of rage and panic. I want to know why the bank thinks I own your house. I want to know why my name is on a $300,000 mortgage signed when I was half comatose in a hospital bed. Silence stretched on the line. It was heavy and suffocating. Mom, don't you dare make a scene, Elaine hissed. That house is not yours. You just pay what you owe family. I own it. Mom. The bank says I own it. You own nothing, she screamed, her composure cracking. Stop making up stories. You are sick. She hung up. I stared at the phone. The screen went black. My heart was hammering against my ribs. If the bank was right, my parents hadn't just used me for utility money. They had stolen my identity, leveraged my credit to buy their own home, and let me believe I was a guest in a house I bought. Check, please. I called out to the waitress. I needed a lawyer, and I needed to find out whose hand was holding the pen on July 15th. Lena Hart's office smelled of expensive leather and intimidation. I had known Lena since she was a contract consultant for Northbridge Utility Solutions, and even back then, she had a reputation for dissecting problems with the precision of a surgeon. I sat across from her glass desk, watching her eyes scan the printouts of the bank emails and the tax history I had downloaded. Outside the window, the city of Riverton looked gray and slushy, matching the cold pit in my stomach. Lena circled something on the document with a red pen. The sound of the marker on the paper was loud in the quiet room. Here's your first red flag, Lena said, tapping the paper. The mailing address for all legal notices regarding the property. It is not the house address, and it is certainly not your townhouse address. I leaned in. The address listed was a post office box at a strip mall on the other side of town. I never rented a box. I said, I get all my mail digitally or at my apartment. Well, someone rented it, Lena replied, her voice dry. And they did it to make sure you never saw a foreclosure warning or a tax assessment. But that is the small stuff. Look at this. She turned her monitor toward me. It was a digital copy of a document from the county registrar. The header read, Quitclaim Deed. It detailed the transfer of property rights, essentially stripping away ownership while keeping the debt. And there, at the bottom, was my signature. Or at least, a signature that was trying very hard to be mine. Next to it was the signature of the witness, Miles Carver. I never signed a quitclaim. I stammered, feeling the blood rush to my face. I don't even know what a quitclaim is. It means you gave up your interest in the property, Lena explained. Look at the date stamped by the notary. July 15th. I stared at the date. The anger that had been simmering since Christmas flared up into something hotter. July 15th, I repeated. Lena. On July 15th, I was in a hospital bed at Cedar County General. My right arm was in a sling. I was on so much morphine I couldn't remember my own middle name, let alone drive to a notary office. Lena nodded, her fingers flying across her keyboard. Exactly. Which is why we are going to pull the records. For the next hour, we built a timeline. Lena requested my admission and discharge records from the hospital. She pulled the security logs for the notary's office building. Then, she asked for my phone. She plugged it into her laptop and extracted the location history. The data did not lie. On July 15th at 2 p.m, the time the deed was notarized, my phone's GPS showed I was stationary in room 402 of the trauma ward. But look here, Lena said, pointing to a scanned image in the notary file. They have a copy of your driver's license. A woman walked into that office, presented your ID, and signed your name, and Miles Carver stood right there and vouched for her. I felt sick. He had my purse. I whispered. When the ambulance took me, Miles held my purse. He had my ID. He must have given it to someone. Maybe my mother. No. She is too short. It had to be someone else. We will find out who, Lena said, her eyes narrowing. But right now, we have a strategic advantage. They think you were just angry about being kicked out. They don't know you have seen the deed. I want to ask them, I said, my voice trembling. I want to drive there and scream at them. I want to ask my father how he could sleep in a house he stole from his own daughter. No, Lena commanded, her tone sharp. You will do no such thing. If you confront them now, they will destroy evidence. They will circle the wagons. We need them to feel safe. Let them think you are just the ungrateful daughter who ran away. Let them keep spinning the lie. She opened a new document on her screen. I am filing an emergency motion, Lena said. We are freezing the asset. They won't be able to sell it, refinance it, or use it as collateral, and I am issuing a subpoena for Miles Carver. We are going to put him under oath. I sat back in the chair, feeling a strange mix of devastation and resolve. My family hadn't just betrayed me. They had erased me. They had replaced me with an imposter to steal my credit. Do it, I said. Freeze everything. The fallout from my digital severance package was almost immediate, but it did not hit the way I expected. I sat in my apartment, watching the notifications roll in. The power company had cut the line to the house on Elm Street at 9 a.m. The internet went dark an hour later. Logic dictated that the overdue notices should have been piling up in my parents' mailbox for weeks. But when Lena ran a trace on the billing addresses, we found they were still being diverted. Even as the lights went out, the paper trail was still flowing into that secret post office box in the strip mall. Someone was still trying to intercept the reality of the situation before it reached the front door. Then my phone rang. It was Gordon. I let it ring 3 times before picking up. I put it on speaker so Lena could hear. Turn it back on, my father barked. There was no greeting. There was no hesitation. I know it was you. You cut the power. You cut the internet. If you don't fix this by noon, I will take you to court for vandalism. You are destroying family property. I looked at Lena. She shook her head slightly, signaling me to hold my ground. I am not destroying anything. Dad, I said, keeping my voice steady, despite the rapid beating of my heart. I just stopped paying for a service I don't use, and I certainly am not vandalizing property that stands in my name. It is not your name, Gordon roared, the distortion cracking the speaker. It is a piece of paper. You are just a signer. You are ungrateful. You want us to freeze? I want you to tell the truth, I replied. I am not feeding a lie anymore. If you want electricity, call the power company and open an account in your name. If the house is yours, they will let you do it. I hung up before he could scream again. 5 minutes later, a text message arrived from Miles. It popped up on my lock screen, a bubble of gray guilt. Riss, please. You are making everything worse. You have to stop. They are going to lose the house if you keep this up. Just sign the power of attorney and we can fix this. I took a screenshot and forwarded it to Lena. Miles thought he was pleading with me, but he had just handed us evidence of coercion. He admitted he knew the house was at risk, and he was pressuring the owner to sign over rights. He is panicking, Lena said, turning her monitor around to face me. And he has good reason to be. Look at this. She had the high-resolution scans of the mortgage documents on the screen. She zoomed in on the signature line of the refinancing agreement. See these microscopic dots where the ink pools, Lena asked, tracing the curve of the M with her stylus. That happens when a hand pauses. A natural signature flows. This person was drawing your name, not writing it. They stopped to check their work. It is a forgery. Marissa? A careful one, but a forgery. Then she dropped the heavier anchor. And they didn't just do it once, Lena said, her voice dropping. I pulled the full title history. The house was refinanced 2 times in the last 3 years. Once for $50,000, and then the big one for $300,000 18 months ago. They have been stripping the equity out of this house and using you as the ATM. I felt the air leave the room. They hadn't just stolen the house, they had hollowed it out. How, I asked. How did they get past the notary twice? Lena opened a media file. We subpoenaed the security footage from the document service center where Miles used to contract. This is from July 15th. The video was grainy, black and white footage from a ceiling camera. I watched as Miles walked into the frame. He was smiling, chatting with the notary. Behind him walked a woman. She was wearing a heavy hooded sweatshirt, the hood pulled low over her face. She kept her head down. She sat, signed the papers rapidly, and left without ever looking up at the camera. I stared at the screen. That was not my mother. Elaine was too short, and she would never wear a hoodie in public. This was a stranger. This was not a desperate act of parents trying to save a home, I said, the realization settling in my gut like cold lead. They hired someone. They planned this. They dressed her up to hide her face. Precisely, Lena said, closing the laptop with a snap. This is fraud. This is conspiracy. And we are going to drag it into the light. She picked up her phone. I am scheduling an emergency hearing at the Cedar County Courthouse, Lena told me. We are going back to where this started. I am not going to show them the video yet. We will save that. The climax comes at the end. But first, we have to let them take the stand and lie under oath. I looked out the window at the gray city. My parents were sitting in the dark right now, blaming me. They had no idea that I wasn't just coming for the keys. I was coming for the whole story. I agreed to meet my mother at a small, nondescript coffee shop near the highway. It was neutral ground, far enough from the neighborhood that nobody would recognize us. Elaine sat across from me, clutching a paper cup as if it were the only thing anchoring her to the earth. She looked smaller than she did on Christmas, her face pale and lined with a new kind of exhaustion. I did not touch my drink. I just looked at her, searching for the woman who used to put Band-Aids on my knees, trying to reconcile her with the woman who threw my coat into the snow. Mom, I said, keeping my voice low, I need you to tell me the truth. Just once. Did you know the house was in my name? Elaine looked down at the table. Her shoulders began to shake. It's complicated. Marissa, she whispered. Your father. He has such a temper. And Miles, he said it was the only way to fix the credit issues. I was scared. I was scared we would be on the street. So you knew, I said. It wasn't a question. I didn't want to know, she cried out, drawing a few glances from the other tables. I just wanted to keep our home. I reached into my bag and pulled out a single sheet of paper. I slid it across the table until it rested under her nose. It was my physical therapy log from Cedar County General. Look at the date. Mom, I said, July 15th, 2:00 in the afternoon. I was learning how to walk again. There was a nurse holding me up by a gate belt. I wasn't in a notary office signing a mortgage. Elaine stared at the paper. She stopped crying. Her face went still. That day, she murmured, her voice trembling. I remember that day. Miles told me not to worry. He said he had a way to make the signature look exactly like yours. He said it was standard practice for families in crisis. The air left my lungs. There it was. She wasn't just a victim of my father's bullying. She was a co-conspirator. She knew I wasn't there. She knew the signature was fake. She had chosen to close her eyes because the lie was more comfortable than the truth. You let a stranger pretend to be me, I said. You let them steal my identity because you didn't want to pay your own bills. Elaine reached for my hand, but I pulled it back. Marissa, please, she begged. We can fix this. Just drop the lawyer. Come home. Before I could answer, the bell above the door jingled aggressively. I looked up to see Gordon marching toward us. He didn't look at me. He looked at Elaine. He grabbed her by the upper arm, his grip tight enough to bruise. Get up, Gordon growled. I told you not to talk to her. Gordon, people are watching. Elaine stammered. He ignored her. He turned his eyes to me. There was no love in them. There was only the cold, calculating look of a man whose asset was malfunctioning. You think you are smart because you hired a lawyer? Gordon sneered. You think you are the owner of that house. You are not the owner. Marissa, you are just the payer. That is all you have ever been to us. He yanked Elaine out of the booth and dragged her toward the door. I sat there, frozen. You are just the payer." It was the most honest thing he had ever said to me. It stripped away the last layer of guilt I had been carrying. I wasn't a daughter to them. I was a resource. I was a vein of gold they were mining until it ran dry. I drove back to my apartment in silence. When I walked in, my laptop was blinking with a new notification. It was an email from the fraud department at Sovereign Bank. "Ms. Reed, regarding your inquiry, we have flagged several inconsistencies in the notarization log provided by the title company. We are opening a formal internal investigation into the origination of this loan." I stared at the screen. The bank smelled blood. My parents thought they were fighting a rebellious daughter, but they had just awakened a corporate giant that did not care about family dynamics. I picked up my phone and texted Lena. They admitted it. Proceed with everything. I was done crying. I was done asking for explanations. They wanted a payer fine. I would make them pay. The hearing began with a character assassination rather than a legal argument. My parents' lawyer, a man with a cheap suit and a loud voice, stood before the bench and painted a picture of me that I barely recognized. He described Gordon and Elaine as the true owners of the property by virtue of actual residency and familial intent. Then he pointed a finger at me. "Your Honor, the plaintiff is using her financial position to blackmail her elderly parents," he declared, his voice booming. "She is attempting to evict them from their family home simply because she had a disagreement over holiday dinner. We are asking the court to recognize equitable title based on usage." I gripped the edge of the table. Lena Hart did not even look up. She waited for him to finish, then she stood up and dropped a heavy binder onto the defense table. It landed with a dull thud that echoed in the quiet room. "Your Honor, possession may be an argument for squatters, but not for owners," Lena said, her voice ice cold. "Here are 60 consecutive months of mortgage payments. Here are 5 years of property tax assessments. Here's the invoice for the roof replacement 2 years ago. Every single cent came from Marissa Reed's personal account. Tenants pay rent. Owners pay for the infrastructure. My client is the only person in this room who has put equity into that building." The judge flipped through the binder, nodding slowly. The momentum seemed to be shifting to our side. But then, the opposing lawyer pulled a document from his briefcase. He held it up like a trophy. "We do not deny Ms. Reed's financial contributions," he said smoothly. "However, she surrendered her interest in the property voluntarily. I present to the court the original quitclaim deed, signed and notarized on July 15th. A murmur went through the room as the bailiff handed the document to the judge. From where I sat, I could see the signature. It looked terrifyingly real. It had the same slant, the same loop on the R. For a second, I felt a wave of nausea. Did I sign it? Did I forget Lena immediately requested permission to call our first witness? Dr. Eris, a forensic document examiner, took the stand. He projected the signature from the deed onto a screen next to a series of signatures from my performance reviews at Northbridge Utility Solutions. If you look at the top of the capital letters, Dr. Eris explained, using a laser pointer, you will see microscopic ink pooling. This indicates a hesitation. The person writing this was not writing a name they knew by muscle memory. They were drawing it. They were copying it. The tremor index is completely inconsistent with Ms. Reed's natural hand. My parents' lawyer looked unfazed. He called Miles Carver to the stand. Miles walked up the aisle, looking every bit the concerned friend. He adjusted his tie and sat down, avoiding my eyes. "Mr. Carver," the lawyer asked. "Did you witness Marissa Reed sign this document I did?" Miles said, his voice steady. "Marissa She has been struggling since her accident. She told me she wanted her parents to feel secure. She said the house was too much pressure for her. She signed it voluntarily." He paused, then added a touch of poison. "She forgets things a lot lately. I think the trauma, it messed with her memory." I felt the blood boil in my veins. He was using my injury, the very thing that made me vulnerable, to paint me as incompetent. Lena stood up for cross-examination. She didn't ask about his relationship with me. She didn't ask about his character. She simply pressed a button on her laptop, displaying a timeline on the court screen. Mr. Carver, you stated in your affidavit that the signing took place at 2 o'clock in the afternoon at the notary office on 4th Street. Lena said, That is correct. Miles answered, This is the GPS log from Ms. Reed's phone, Lena said, pointing to the screen. And this is the visitor log from the physical therapy wing at Cedar County General. At 2 o'clock on July 15th, Marissa Reed was strapped into a rehabilitation harness, learning how to walk again. She was 3 miles away from the notary office. Miles blinked. He looked at the screen, then at his lawyer. Well, maybe my watch was wrong. Maybe it was earlier. The notary stamp is time-coded. Mr. Carver, Lena snapped. Are you suggesting the notary is also lying, or are you suggesting my client can be in 2 places at once? Miles started to sweat. He pulled at his collar. She might have signed it before and brought it in. I don't recall the exact second. Gordon suddenly slammed his hand on the table, startling everyone. He stood up, his face red. She signed it, Gordon shouted, pointing a shaking finger at me. That is all that matters. She signed it, so the house is ours. Stop twisting the words. The courtroom went silent. My father had just walked into the trap. By insisting I signed it, he had tied their entire defense to the validity of that specific piece of paper. If the paper was fake, they had nothing. Sit down, Mr. Reed, the judge ordered, his voice stern. He turned to Miles. Mr. Carver, I want the full video footage from the notary's office submitted to this court immediately. We need to see who walked into that room. Miles looked pale. Your Honor, we had a server crash last month. The data from that week, it is gone. We tried to recover it, but it is corrupted. The judge narrowed his eyes. The excuse was too convenient, and everyone in the room knew it. He looked from Miles to my parents, and then to me. This court is not satisfied with the chain of evidence provided by the defense. The judge ruled, I am issuing a temporary injunction. All assets regarding the property are frozen effective immediately. No one sells, no one refinances, and no one transfers a dime. He turned to the court clerk. And I am ordering Sovereign Bank to produce the original loan origination file from their physical archives. The judge continued. Not the digital scan, the wet ink file. We resume in 48 hours. Lena leaned over to me and whispered, That is the ball game. The digital file can be doctored. The physical file, that is where they made their mistake. I looked at Miles. He was not looking at the judge. He was looking at my father with pure panic in his eyes. The alliance was crumbling. The miniature pine tree sat in the corner of my temporary sublet, shedding dry needles onto the cheap laminate floor. I had bought it at a drugstore the night after I was kicked out. A pathetic attempt to salvage some holiday spirit. Now, staring at it in the dim light of the living room, I realized that Christmas was no longer a holiday for me. It was a scar. It was the anniversary of the moment I stopped being a daughter and started being a defendant. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, breaking the heavy silence. It was Lena. It was nearly 10 o'clock at night. Lawyers like Lena Hart did not call at this hour unless the building was on fire or they had found a smoking gun. I have the physical file from the bank archives, Lena said, skipping the pleasantries. Her voice sounded electric. The courier just dropped it off. Marissa, there is a document here that was not in the digital system. It is a payoff transfer addendum. I sat up, gripping the phone. What does that mean? It means the bank knew exactly who was paying the bills from day one, Lena explained, the sound of shuffling papers coming through the speaker. This addendum states that upon full satisfaction of the loan, the deed is automatically perfected in the name of the borrower. In the name of Marissa Reed? This was created by the loan officer because you were the only one with the credit score to qualify. Your parents didn't just let you live there. The bank set this up so you would own it because you were the only one financing it. I felt a wave of nausea. For years, Gordon had dangled the promise of ownership like a carrot on a stick. We will put your name on the deed later. We will sort it out when the market is better. It was all a lie. The bank had already done it. My parents knew that if I stopped paying, they would lose everything, so they had to invent a narrative where I was an intruder in my own investment. There is something else, Lena continued, her voice dropping lower. In the contact information section of the physical file, there is a change of address form. It was filed 18 months ago. It requests that all two-factor authentication codes and verbal verifications be routed to a new mobile number. My heart hammered against my ribs. Let me guess. It was not my number. It was Miles Carver's number, Lena said. And the date on the request form is July 16th, the day after your surgery. The day you were heavily sedated. The room spun. That was why I never got the fraud alerts. That was why the bank never reached me when the refinancing went through. Miles had diverted the digital security checks to his own pocket while I was lying in a hospital bed. I'm filing a subpoena for the carrier data right now, Lena said, her tone shifting from investigative to predatory. And I am requesting the security footage from the bank branch where this request was submitted. We are going to prove who walked up to that teller window pretending to be you. I hung up and stared at the dark window. My phone lit up again almost immediately. This time, it was a text message from Miles. You need to stop this. If you don't drop the case, I am going to the press. I will tell them you are mentally unstable and harassing your elderly parents. Don't make me do it. I forwarded the screenshot to Lena. Her reply came back in 30 seconds. Do not reply. Save it. That is witness intimidation and obstruction of justice. He is drowning. Marissa, let him thrash. I put the phone down, but sleep was impossible. The city outside was quiet, but my mind was a storm of memories. I thought of Miles bringing me flowers in the hospital. I thought of my mother holding my hand. Every kindness had been a cover for a transaction. At 2 a.m, my phone lit up one last time. It was a message from Elaine. I am sorry, but your father will not stop. I stared at the words. It was a confession wrapped in a warning. She knew they were wrong. She knew they had stolen from me. But she was too weak to stand up to Gordon. So she was watching the collision from the passenger seat. I turned off the phone. I did not want her apology. An apology would not pay the mortgage. An apology would not erase the forgery. When the sun came up, I put on my dark gray suit. I brushed my hair back and looked in the mirror. The woman looking back at me was not the scared girl who stood on the porch on Christmas night. That girl was gone. I grabbed my bag and walked out the door. Today was the final hearing. I was not going to court to save my family's reputation. I was going to burn the lie to the ground, even if it meant watching them sit in the ashes. The final hearing at the Cedar County Courthouse was not a battle. It was an execution. The courtroom was packed, but the only voice that mattered belonged to the representative from Sovereign Bank. He stood at the witness stand, adjusting his glasses, and delivered the first blow that shattered my parents' defense. Your Honor, according to the original loan origination documents and the payoff transfer addendum, Marissa Reed is the sole legal owner of the property. The representative stated clearly, Gordon and Elaine Reed are listed strictly as permitted occupants. They have no equity interest. They never did. My father's lawyer scrambled, sweat beading on his forehead. Objection? Our daughter made a verbal promise to transfer the title. This is a familial understanding. The judge did not even look up from his notes. Counselor, this court operates on paper and evidence, not on hearsay and holiday dinner promises. Sit down. Lena Hart stood up. It was time for the kill shot. Your Honor. We would like to submit Exhibit C, Lena said, her voice cutting through the room like a knife. This is a cross-reference of the carrier data from the day the contact information on the account was changed. And this is the security footage from the bank branch on that same day. On the large screen, the video played. A woman who was definitely not me stood at the bank counter. She was wearing a hat and sunglasses. Beside her stood Miles Carver. The timestamp matched perfectly with the moment my security questions were changed. The person signing that verification form is 5'2". Lena noted, my client is 5'7", and the phone number added to the account belongs to Mr. Carver. Miles stood up, his face gray. I was just helping. She asked me to go. The judge held up a hand. Bailiff, play the audio log from the call center. The room went silent as a recording played over the speakers. It was Miles's voice, unmistakable and arrogant. Look, just process the override. The voice on the tape snapped. She's in the hospital and can't talk. We need this done fast before she wakes up and complicates things. The silence that followed was absolute. Miles sank back into his chair, burying his face in his hands. Gordon suddenly exploded. He jumped to his feet, knocking his chair over. We had to do it, my father screamed, his face purple with rage. We could not let that ungrateful girl keep the house. We couldn't let her hold it over our heads and abandon us when we got old. It was our insurance policy. The entire courtroom gasped. In his anger, my father had just confessed to the motive. They didn't steal the house because they thought it was theirs. They stole it because they knew it wasn't. Elaine burst into tears, reaching for a tissue. We just wanted to be a family. She sobbed. We didn't mean to hurt anyone. Lena walked over to the defense table and placed a single piece of paper in front of her. It was a printout of the text message Elaine had sent me. Mrs. Reed, is this your text message where you admitted Miles had a way to fake the signature? Lena asked coldly. Elaine froze. Her tears stopped instantly. She looked at the paper, then at the judge, and said nothing. The judge slammed his gavel. The sound cracked like a gunshot. I have heard enough. The judge declared, I am ruling in favor of the plaintiff, Marissa Reed. The quitclaim deed is hereby voided as a fraudulent instrument. The court reaffirms Ms. Reed's sole ownership of the property. I am granting the request for an immediate eviction order, enforceable by the sheriff within 24 hours. He paused, looking directly at Miles and my parents. Furthermore, due to the overwhelming evidence of forgery, identity theft, and wire fraud, I am referring this entire file to the district attorney's office. Mr. Carver, do not leave this room. Bailiff, take him into custody. 2 officers moved toward Miles. Gordon slumped into his chair, defeated. Elaine looked at me, her eyes wide with shock. I stood up and smoothed my skirt. I walked past the defense table on my way out. I stopped for 1 second to look at the people who raised me. On Christmas, you kicked me out like I was invisible. Today, the law gave me back my name. I turned and walked out. The heavy doors of the courtroom swung shut behind me and Lena. The knot in my chest was finally gone. The bank had confirmed I owned the house, but more importantly, I owned my life again. My parents and Miles had built a stage for a tragedy, but they were the only ones left standing in the wreckage when the curtain fell. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you guys are tuning in from. So please drop a comment below and let me know your city or country so we can connect. If you enjoyed seeing justice served cold, please make sure to subscribe to Victoria Revenge Stories, hit that like button, and smash the hype button to help this story reach even more people. See you in the next one.